Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Crucial Talks podcast. I am your host, Mike Saddam, and today's episode is going to be about risk tolerance, how we accept risk, how we decide what we're going to do considering risk, those sorts of things. But it's going to be a little bit different because I've used audio clips before to kind of lead the discussion in these episodes. Today, I'm going to use them from a couple of different sources. One is from Gary Vaynerchuk. I listened to him talk just recently on YouTube and on his podcast, and he talked about risk tolerance when using social media. And I found it super interesting because I have spoken on risk tolerance to a lot of different industries: aviation, gas and petroleum, a geothermal power plant, public safety, military, and I've talked about risk and risk tolerance in these complex industries where your decisions can actually hurt you. They can lead you to danger. There can be dangerous behavior because of the decisions you're making and the thought processes you go through to make those decisions. When I listened to Gary Vaynerchuk's speech about risk tolerance, I found it so interesting because just like anything we do, there are two different sides of every coin. We talked about communication before, where while you communicate, it's either growing in a positive direction or a negative direction. And I think risk is a lot like that. You know, I've talked about it to people that are doing dangerous jobs to help them be safe, to help them make better decisions. I've talked to their supervisors and bosses about it so they understand the factors that impact human beings and human decision making. But now I want to flip that on its head a little bit. I want to talk about risk tolerance in a positive way, meaning I want to talk about how we can accept risk to help what we do every single day. Because ultimately, to get things done, we got to take risk. We have to be able to understand the risks we're willing to take and why we're not willing to take that risk. So the clips we're going to use today is the one from Gary Vaynerchuk. And if you get a chance, listen to the whole thing. Just go to YouTube, type in Gary V risk tolerance, and it'll pop up. Or listen to the Gary V experience on any podcast hosting site, because he talks about risk tolerance and how entrepreneurs can use it or understand it and take the risk so that they can grow their business. The other clips we're going to listen to are from my speeches to those complex industries like geothermal power and gas and petroleum about risk tolerance. And I'm going to change the tone I use from those clips. I'm going to talk about each one as we go through them so that I'm not now talking about risk tolerance and how to prevent behavior that is risky in a complex industry, but I'm going to flip it on its head so that we get to talk about risk tolerance and how we can understand it so we're willing to take those risks that could help us in our businesses, to grow them, to reach out to more people, to grow our communities, to network better. Whatever might be holding you back, understanding risk tolerance may let you move forward in that positive direction. So without further comment, let's listen to Gary Vee when he talks about risk tolerance.
When you start thinking about Alexa and all these other things, one of the things that my career has been completely predicated on is the fact that I am willing to take chances on things that aren't mainstream yet, because I understand that if I go after social code, and if I go after Vine, and if I go after Micmac, and if I go after Yak, and if I go after all these things, that I only need one of those 7 to actually hit Snapchat, Instagram, to win that bet. We have enormous fear in this room to I have to wait, or let's wait till it's big, or what if I waste my time? Awkward, right? Yeah, super awkward. You can leave if you want, but you can chill too. Got it. Will I waste my time on these platforms, right? Will I waste my time on these platforms if it doesn't become big? And so one of the other themes that I really wanted to leave here with tonight, knowing the demo of this room, is we have to have a lot more risk tolerance on new platforms. If you're not playing, back to details, and I know you're taking notes, if you're not playing with Marco Polo and After School and House Party, then you're not there potentially at the platforms that can become the next things at the top of our tongue.
All right, so any of you listening, does that speak to you? Because I know it spoke to me. Because if you follow me at all, you know I do a lot of audio stuff, right? I do this podcast and I post videos on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, but they're really just audio. I've only done one video where you actually see my face. And why is that? It's because at this point, I just haven't been willing to take the risk to put my face out there, right? There's something holding me back from doing that. And it's my decision making that impacts that. It's the decisions I make on whether I'm willing to take that risk, put my face out there, not just my voice. You've all heard me say it before. I think I have the face for radio and definitely not video. But there is a certain amount of risk we have to take when we're putting ourselves out there. But it's something I think I need to do fairly soon, just because I want to get the message out there that our workplaces and our communities can be better if we understand each other as social storytellers, as social animals, as people. So it's my decision making that is actually impacting my risk. What risks am I willing to take? And how do I decide what risks I'm willing to take? So I talked about decision making in my risk tolerance speech. So listen quickly to what I talk about when we're considering human beings making decisions. Decision making is emotional. There's a lot of people out there that say, hey, people will make decisions based on the data they have. Reality is people make decisions based on the emotions they have. The same part of your brain where emotions like trust and love and hate and anger are the same parts of your brain that light up when you make a decision. So I'm talking about decision making being emotional. And we heard Gary Vaynerchuk talk about fear. So when we think about fear, we have to understand that that emotion impacts the amount of risk we're willing to tolerate. Yeah, I'm scared about putting my face out there in video, and that is impacting my decisions. Now, I might blame it on the fact, video takes more editing or video is harder to do. In reality, it doesn't take that much more. I mean, we can record it on our phones. We can record it from our cameras on our computers. We can buy a cheap camera to record video. We can splice in audio. I mean, there's all of this stuff out there that makes it super easy. But fear and the impact emotions have on decisions impacts the risks we're willing to take. And we try to talk ourselves into other reasons why we can't do something. But really, it comes down to that emotionally driven response to fear that keeps us from doing something that could actually benefit us. Risk tolerance isn't just about avoiding risk and avoiding dangerous situations. It's really about the emotional aspect of decision making, and are we willing to take those risks that can actually move us forward in life? So now I want us to understand risk, and really what is risk and what is risk tolerance. So listen to this clip from when I talk to people about risk and risk tolerance and the definitions of those things. Risk is context-based. It's based on the situation. And it's based on what's important to us at the time and the decisions we're going to make. In some of those situations, my risk tolerance would be low. I'm not willing to accept the risk. So what is risk? What about this? Is risk reality? Is the risk we're dealing with in this room at this moment with each other the same for everybody in the room? Or are there context-driven situations that could change it between you and you? Who went out late last night? Who came from the West Coast and is now dealing with East Coast time? Is it reality? Or is it perception? Is risk just something that's dangerous? Or is it involved with our decision-making process no matter what we're doing? Risk exists in the eye of the beholder. Risk is how you see it. So what is it? Well, it's the amount somebody's willing to tolerate to accomplish a certain task, right? Risk is the degree to which someone faces uncertain outcomes. Now, in that clip, I'm talking about risk and risk tolerance and what it is. What are we willing to accept? What level of risk are we willing to accept to accomplish a goal that may lead to uncertain outcomes? When we're talking about this in our businesses, as if you're an entrepreneur, if you've got some kind of side hustle, what are you willing to do? What kind of risk are you willing to take? And where can that risk lead us? A lot of times we just don't know. But that's what I loved about that clip from Gary Vaynerchuk is the fact that, yeah, we don't know. But we don't know whether it's going to lead to something super good or if it's not. But it only has to hit that one time. But if we're not putting ourselves out there, if we're not willing to take that risk, then you can be sure of one thing, that nothing's going to happen, because we're not building anything either in the positive or even negative direction. Sometimes you just got to be willing to take that risk. So what kind of factors impact the risk we're willing to take? Our level of risk tolerance. The first factor I talk about in my speech, my presentation about risk tolerance, is how we see ourselves and how good we are, how we view how good we are at what we're about ready to accomplish. Because how we see ourselves makes our risk tolerance go up or down, because it's all based on perception. I've talked about us being social storytellers before, but we tell ourselves stories also. And the stories we tell ourselves can impact our confidence and our ability, or our thought process that goes into what we want to accomplish, and if we're willing to take a step forward. One of the factors that impacts how much risk we're willing to take is our overestimation of ability. Do we think we're better than we really are? People want to be good at what they do, but if we think we're a little better than we are, our tolerance of risk actually will go up. Again, perception, what we've learned, how we see things, how we're viewing the reality we're in. So what I'm talking about is people that overestimate their abilities will take riskier behavior. So let's flip that on its head. If we don't think we're good enough, if we don't think we can accomplish what people like Simon Sinek and Gary Vee and these guys that are out there putting out social media stuff and building their brand, building their business, if we don't think we're good enough to do that, we're not going to take that step forward. So there's two sides to every coin. In the speech I gave, I'm warning people about overestimating your abilities and how that can make you take riskier behavior. But I also want to warn people that if you talk yourself down and you reduce your confidence, you're not going to take that step forward. We got to have a balance of the two. If you want to move forward in life, you got to take risk, because if you're not taking risk, you're going to be in the same place you always are. You're not going to go anywhere. And that's why that first factor of our estimation of our own abilities, it's about perception. So start perceiving yourself. Tell yourself the stories that you can accomplish what you want, and that will help you increase the amount of risk you're willing to take. Now, the next factor I want to talk about is how risk tolerance can go up when we do something more times, when we're actually practicing and experiencing things. Risk tolerance factor number 2. If you do the task over and over and over, if you're familiar with the task, your tolerance, what you're willing to accept, actually goes up. So the more we are familiar with a task, the more risk we are willing to tolerate, because the more you do it, the more you become accustomed to it. And these things are factors that sometimes we don't have a whole lot of control over. Sometimes it's a matter of awareness to change our perception, because perception by human beings is how we make sense of the world around us. So understanding these factors and being aware of them can actually change the lens you use to view your world. Whether it's in aviation, whether it's at home, whether you're working on your car, those lenses we use to view what's going on around us is what impacts the perception we have, impacts the decisions we're going to make. So when I first started the Crucial Talks podcast, I really was nervous about it. Never done it before, didn't know if I had the right equipment, didn't know if anybody would listen to it, didn't know if the information I gave would be valuable. But as I did it more, as I experienced making the podcast, the amount of risk I was willing to take went up. I tried different equipment. I started interviewing people and using different software to record those interviews. The more I did it, the more risk I was willing to tolerate. And I know in my heart that if I start doing video, it's going to be the same way. The more I do it, the better I'll get, the more risk I'm willing to take. So we have to consider those things when we're thinking about what decisions we're going to make, where we want to go in the future, and understand that the more we do it, the more we're going to be able to get accustomed to it and make those decisions. And really, I think Gary Vaynerchuk, in that clip we listened to, he talks about that. He alludes to that, hey, you got to get out there and start doing it. Start taking some steps forward, because if you're moving forward, you're actually going to be able to get better at what you do, and you're actually going to be more willing to take those risks. If we're not moving forward, we're moving backward. There's no real middle of the road. So the more you experience things and the more you practice, the more risk you're going to be willing to take in those aspects of your life that you want to move forward in. So now let's listen to this next clip from me about the third factor that impacts how much risk we're willing to tolerate. And when we're talking about this third factor, what we're talking about is how serious we feel the outcome will be of what we're about ready to do. The seriousness of the outcome. If something is really serious, your tolerance of risk will actually go down. You are less tolerant of accepting risk. So the more serious the outcome is, the lower tolerance we have for the risk involved. So if there is a serious outcome, whether it's a legal outcome or physical outcome or whatever, the more serious it is, the lower our risk tolerance. If we perceive the situation as not as serious, it may be serious. Reality for somebody else is it may be totally serious, but in your mind, it's not as serious. You're willing to accept more risk. So the seriousness of the outcome. Now, in my speech, I talked about legal outcomes and that sort of thing, but really, it's these social outcomes that make us afraid, that emotion that goes with being afraid of taking that step or doing that thing, or for me, getting out on video, right? Like how serious is really that outcome if I put myself on video? Yeah, somebody commenting that I'm ugly or I don't know what I'm talking about. That's an emotional response. But a lot of what we deal with, a lot of things that we're afraid of is that emotion. It's not the money and it's not any of that other stuff. It's really the acceptance by other people in our tribe, in our group. We're afraid of being embarrassed. We're afraid of being looked at as a failure. We're afraid that we're only one person will watch and that's our mom, right? We're afraid of those things, so we don't take that action. So there's a bunch more risk factors, 7 more that Dave Fennell talks about. And I want to take this opportunity to give a quick shout out to Dave, because Dave Fennell has done a ton of work on risk tolerance. He came up with these 10 factors that impact risk tolerance. So if you get a chance, just Google it or YouTube, and you'll see him talking about these 10 factors of risk tolerance, because he's done such great work in this space. And so we went through 3 that I think are pertinent to us as people and moving our businesses forward and creating our personal brand, that sort of thing. A different way to look at risk and risk tolerance. So now that we have talked about these 3 factors, what can we do about it? What steps can we take to understand risk better and what we're willing to do? So what we can see is that in all of these cases, we have a number of factors that impact our perception of risk and what we're willing to tolerate. And it all comes down to what we hold as valuable, what we recognize and perceive as hazards, and how the person interacts with all of those. And it's a constantly moving target. So what can you do? Ask yourselves, what can go wrong? How bad could it be? Did anything change from last time? Am I ready to accomplish this task? Do I understand what needs to be done? Do I have the right tools? Just some questions you can ask yourself. So those questions I apply to these complex industries, aviation, gas and petroleum, power plants, those sorts of things. And so I pose these questions to people so that they can understand if they're willing to tolerate too much risk. So now let's flip it on its head. Let's take my fear of putting video out, of putting content out that has my face all over it. What am I afraid of? What questions can I ask to increase the tolerance of risk? How much risk am I willing to take on to accomplish that task? So what can go wrong? Well, I won't get any views, or I'll get called ugly, or people just think I'm stupid putting video out there. They just won't accept it. Is that really what can go wrong? I mean, that's not that big of a deal, right? How bad can it be? That's the next question. How bad could it be? What if I go viral for something stupid I say? All right, well, how bad can it actually be? I mean, with the quickness of society now, with how fast the world is moving, it'll be a flash in the pan, right? It won't be that big of a deal. I can ask myself, did anything change from last time? After every single video I do, right? Is there something I learned from it? Can I do something better? What's changed? What's the social landscape out there? What people are watching? Should it go on YouTube? Should it go on Instagram? Where should I post it? It's all these things that we can talk about within ourselves to get better at what we do, which means we're willing to take those risks. Am I ready to accomplish this task? Do I have the right skill set to be able to talk in a clear way on video? Do I have the right equipment? Do I understand how it posts? Do I understand where to post it? Do I understand that process? So am I ready to accomplish the task? That's a good question to ask us no matter what we do. Do I understand what needs to be done? Do I understand that video is a method, is a content method that we can put out there that a lot of people are engaging in now? It really is a way business is being done in a lot of ways. It's a way people are growing their personal brand. So do I understand what needs to be done? And do I have the right tools? Do I have the camera? Do I have the computer? Do I have the software? Do I have the social media accounts? Do I understand how to interact with those accounts? Do I understand how to post that video content on different channels? Do I understand how to post it on my own website? And if you haven't visited it, it's www.crucialtalks.com, and I do have a video up there. So, but am I willing to take that step with those right tools? So in today's episode, we talked a lot about risk tolerance. I really loved being able to talk about it in this way because normally I speak to people about how do you engage with risk and tolerate different levels of risk and how that can lead to dangerous behavior in your workplace. But it was cool to talk about it in a way that's positive in its action. Like, how do you grow your business? How do you build your personal brand? How do you take those steps forward when you're hesitant? When you got to start moving forward and start building momentum, it's so cool to be talking to you about risk tolerance and how we can impact that so that we're willing to take those risks to build a better lives for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, in our workplaces. How do we do that? So I really appreciate you listening to this episode. So I'm going to take a risk right now and ask you to subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends and coworkers, and review it. Hopefully review it highly because I really want to get it out there for other people to experience. Thanks a lot. If you get a chance, please visit me at www.crucialtalks.com and connect with me. I'd love to hear from you. And remember, if we want to understand behavior, we need to understand what drives people.